Solving the climate crisis, we keep hearing, it's just going to take forever. We don't know what to do. It could take until the end of the century. No, these are all lies. We can do it very quickly. We know exactly what to do. We have the technologies. The problem is simply that capital is not making the necessary investments. And so you need a public finance mechanism to do it. China realized that. They leapfrogged ahead of the West. And what are we going to do? Just sit here waiting around for capital to decide that it's worth saving the world? That's a ludicrous proposition. Capital will never voluntarily reduce production of things that are profitable.
Welcome back to the Better Future podcast. I'm not going to beat around the bush here because I'm so excited about today's episode. And that's because today we're talking with Jason Hickel. He's a professor at the Autonomous University of Barcelona and the author of 2 books, The Divide and Less is More. When I came up with the idea for this podcast, I made a list of the people I might want to interview. And I'm not joking when I say Jason Hickel was the first name on that list. His research, which focuses on political economy and inequality and ecological economics, has had a profound impact on the way that I see the world. And his ability to distill that research into accessible social media content was an original inspiration for all the work that I'm doing today. So when I recently got the chance to visit Barcelona, I had to ask him about an interview, and this conversation is the result. We cover a lot of topics here, but essentially this is a conversation about why capitalism can't solve climate change and what a post-capitalist democratic economy could really look like. Let's get into it. So, Jason.
Here we are.
Good to be here with you.
Good to be here with you.
Good to be in Barcelona.
It's a great city, very beautiful.
It is a really nice city. I kind of wish American cities were more like this.
The actual, the structure of urban life is wonderful here. Walkable streets, it's very livable. Everyone has access to supermarkets and public transit right by their homes. The cities should be.
Imagine that. My listeners in the U.S. will be like, I don't understand what he's talking about.
It's always funny to me the way, in the U.S., people will fly, spend tons of money to fly to European cities and enjoy living a European urban life.
Yep.
But then can't imagine implementing this in the United States.
Right.
This is crazy.
Speaking of the States, there's a feeling for those of us living there now that everything's getting more expensive and the cost of living continues to go up. And it seems to be a bit disconnected from the reports we see about the economy that say the economy is doing really well. In fact, it's the biggest it's ever been. The stock market's the highest it's ever been. And so I feel there's a bit of a disconnect between the abundance that we see on the stock market charts and then the lack of abundance that we feel in our day-to-day life. And I wonder if you have a perspective on why it feels that way.
It's wild, actually. So the way that economists measure success in an economy, neoclassical economists, is through GDP, right? And the U.S. has an extremely high level of GDP per capita, something like $70,000 per capita, making it one of the richest countries in the world. And yet, if you look at people's actual standards of living in everyday life, it's misery for many people, right? So, half the population cannot afford healthcare, which is just crazy. This is a basic human right. Everyone should have free access to it, and people can't. 25% of the U.S. population lives in substandard housing. I mean, think about this. Again, these are basics: housing, nutritious food, healthcare, higher education. If you want to go to a decent university, then you're looking at, if you have, let's say, 2 kids, you're looking at almost $500,000 of expenditure to send 2 kids to university. This is completely mad.
It's a lot.
And so I think that the key lesson here is that, the way that GDP measures the economy is by just looking at total output of all goods, regardless of what they actually are. When, of course, what matters for actual human well-being and social progress is the specific goods and services, producing the specific goods and services that people actually need to live a decent life and ensuring universal access to those things.
So are you saying that despite our economy being so big, we're not producing the right things?
Correct. So, yeah, basically. Okay. So, it's a capitalist economy. And the fundamental premise of capitalism is that capital, which is basically, the big banks, the major firms, the 1% who own the majority of investable assets and wealth, these are the factions of our society, a very small elite faction of our society that controls production. They organize our labor and our resources and investment and so on around producing whatever they want to. And of course, what they choose to produce is what is most profitable to them, right?
Right.
So capital only produces what's profitable to capital and does not produce things that are less profitable or not profitable at all, even if they're crucially necessary. And this is why we have this absolute crazy scenario where we have massive overproduction of things like mansions and private jets and SUVs and fast fashion and weapons in the USA, for example, and chronic shortages of necessary goods like public transit and nutritious food and affordable housing.
Yep.
I mean, think about this. This is actually wild when you think about it, because the way that people will typically criticize socialism is, oh, there were shortages. People weren't able to buy, jeans whenever they wanted to, et cetera. This is, by the way, due to the blockades and sanctions placed on socialist countries. But if you look at capitalist economies today, even in the wealthiest economies in the world, there are critical shortages of absolutely existentially necessary things.
Like healthcare.
And I think if you think about the climate crisis as well right now, one of the most important things we need is renewable energy. But we're not making investments. Capital is not making the necessary investments in renewable energy. Why? Because renewable energy, even while it's cheaper than fossil fuels, is less profitable. And so capital invests in fossil fuels because they're 3 or 4 times more profitable than renewables, even as the world is burning around us. And we're basically just hostage to this reality where, we're not in control of our own productive capacities. Capital is making the decisions and is investing in destructive and unnecessary things instead of what's obviously needed.
Right. So how do we take that control back? I mean, that's a big one, and we're gonna get into it during the course of this conversation. But what would that even look like? I mean, I think that people understand the idea of capital allocating resources just because it's, I studied economics. It's just what we're taught. The markets will optimize for an equilibrium where profit is maximized. And that's just almost an assumption of capitalist societies that that's a logical way to run things. But obviously, when we zoom out and look at the results, it doesn't seem like it's really delivering on people's needs.
It is definitely not. And it's quite funny, actually, because we're always told that capital makes rational allocations of productive capacity. But in fact, they're completely irrational, right? And you see this in the middle of the kinds of social crises and ecological crises we face right now. Capital is not making the necessary investments in addressing these. Instead, it's actually exacerbating these crises. And what is rational about that, right? And so we clearly need to be able to overcome the capitalist law of value, which dictates that profitability is the main metric by which you make investments, and instead be producing what is most socially and ecologically necessary. We have the actual capacity to do these things. We have the labor and the engineers and the factories and resources.
Yeah.
And yet we don't have any control over these productive capacities. It's all in the hands of capital.
So yeah, what would it look like to have more control? Is that a democratic system for allocating resources? Is it a centralized system for allocating resources? I think some people hear what you're saying and they're like, oh no, we don't want like a Soviet communist style command and control economy, or we don't want you making all those decisions, they're like, who's this guy?
I don't know why not.
I would trust you to do that.
I'm very grateful. So would I. So it's a really good question. Look, I think that the best way to approach this is to think about what capitalism is. So when people think of capitalism, they often think of things like markets and businesses and trade, right? But what's interesting is that these things have been around for thousands of years before capitalism. What distinguishes capitalism from other economic systems is that it is fundamentally anti-democratic. This is a bit strange for people to hear, I think, in some cases, because we live in political democracies.
Right.
But when it comes to the economic system, the system of production, there's no democracy at all, right? Decisions about what to produce and for whose benefit and how the yields of our production are distributed, these decisions are made by capital. Again, the 1% and the big firms and the private banks. And we don't get any say whatsoever. And this is crucial because think about it, it's the production system that determines everything about our society, right? It shapes our urban landscapes. It determines how we use our resources, what we do with our time as workers, 8 hours a day, for our entire lives, our entire working lives. It shapes our society. It determines our future, especially when it comes to the questions about the climate crisis and so on, and ecological breakdown. And we have zero say in any of this. We cannot actually say that we live in a democracy when we have no democratic control over production and the use of our surplus. This is crucial because, again, this is our labor, right? This is our labor. And the surplus is what we generate through our work every day. And we should have some say over how that surplus is invested for additional rounds of production.
And would that look like voting on how investments get made, or on what parts of the economy are grown and focused on by different corporations? I'm just trying to imagine how that would work. Maybe it's my limited American brain, just USA trained brain, struggling to understand how this could work. But I think it would be helpful to paint the picture for folks of like how that could look in terms of the decision-making process.
Totally. I think there's several elements here. So the main thing here is that if capital is anti-democratic, then the antidote to capitalism is simply economic democracy. So if we value democracy, which presumably we do, then the idea is to extend the principle of democracy into the realm of production, right? And this is effectively what democratic socialism means. And so the question about like, what does that actually look like in practical terms? I think that there's several answers. One is, we would want to have a decommodified social foundation. And so things like healthcare, education, affordable housing, clean energy, access to recreational facilities, clean water systems, et cetera, et cetera. These things are necessary for life. Like we cannot survive without these things. They're crucial for any kind of dignified society. And we should be organizing our production to ensure adequate output of these things and universal access to them. And so this basically takes a chunk of the economy and says, this is going to be organized around the public good. That's one part. The second pillar, I think, would be a public finance mechanism, right? And so instead of giving capital all the control over directing finance and therefore directing our labor and our production, we have a public finance mechanism that can make investments towards democratically ratified objectives. So if people are voting for, let's do some climate mitigation, let's do some, ecological regeneration, or let's build more affordable housing, the public finance mechanism can make those necessary investments and achieve these objectives very quickly without waiting around for capital to do them. And then the final piece, I would say, is democracy in the workplace, right? So if you can imagine a democratic firm, like having democracy in the place where you work, then you're halfway there to understanding what a democratic socialist economy could look like, where workers themselves can decide what should we be producing, for whose benefit, how should we distribute the yields of our own labor.
One of the examples you just mentioned was public investments into climate mitigation and solving the climate crisis. A lot of people who believe deeply in the power of capitalism and quote unquote free markets to solve big social problems like this would say that someone's going to find a profitable way to solve climate change, and so we don't need the government to do anything. They should stay out of it because someone's going to find a way to build a business that makes a product or a service that solves it through the means of, a more traditional capitalist model. I would argue we haven't seen that yet, so it might be time to stop waiting, given that global temperatures are consistently rising, biodiversity's falling precipitously, and we're running out of time. What would you say to people who trust capitalism to solve climate change?
I think the reality is that it's not working, and I think we have to face up to that fact. And look, the crucial thing is this, this is not a matter of us needing new technologies. The technology already exists. Solar panels, wind turbines, et cetera, renewable energy capacities, which we know that we could develop and expand. However, capital is not investing in those things because they're not as profitable as things like fossil fuels and SUVs and fast fashion and weapons.
Right.
Those are the profit sectors, so capital plows investment into them and gives totally inadequate investment to renewable energy development. This is very well demonstrated. And if you look at what's happening with the big investment firms, take BlackRock. BlackRock manages investments of trillions of dollars. This is our surplus that's getting directed towards production. But what do they choose to invest in? Recently, they had agreed to climate goals, basically saying, we're going to make some share of our investments into green energy transition. And then just a few months ago, they explicitly abandoned those rules. And they stated explicitly, it's because green transition is not profitable enough. We're going back to the more traditional profit sectors, in other words, fossil fuels. It's absolutely crazy. And so this should be a clarifying moment for anybody. We have to realize that leaving capital in control of the transition means it's not going to happen. And the obvious counterpoint to this is, I think, what's happening in China. So China took a totally different approach. They realized that capital would not be making the necessary investments in renewable energy technology development. And so they used public finance to achieve it. And they've made rapid gains in renewable tech and now are the world leaders, right?
Yeah.
In a very short period of time. It just shows you solving the climate crisis, we keep hearing it's just going to take forever. We don't know what to do. It could take until the end of the century. No, these are all lies. We can do it very quickly. We know exactly what to do. We have the technologies. The problem is simply that capital is not making the necessary investments. And so you need a public finance mechanism to do it. China realized that. They leapfrogged ahead of the West. And what are we going to do? Just sit here waiting around for capital to decide that it's worth saving the world? That's a ludicrous proposition. And so I think that anyone who thinks that this is a good idea has to just face reality.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense. There's really no way to defend that argument anymore. And it's time to give up.
It's time to give up. We know that in high-income countries, the only way to achieve sufficiently rapid decarbonization to meet the Paris Agreement objectives is to scale down total energy use, right? And of course, some of that can be achieved through efficiency improvements.
This is degrowth, right? Scaling down total energy consumption.
Yeah. But what it's also going to require is actually reducing less necessary forms of production. And so, things that are very energy intensive and don't add anything to social well-being, again, things like mansions and private jets and fast fashion and industrial beef, we know from scientists that we have to be scaling these things down. But here's the problem. Capital will never voluntarily reduce production of things that are profitable.
Right.
And so we're stuck in a situation where we're just going to keep producing these things even while we know this is going to cause mass misery.
It's considered irrational to scale down the production of something that's profitable.
Totally but irrational. Why would you ever do it?
But I feel like the irrational part is not scaling down the production of things that are destroying the planet.
Correct.
And biodiversity and leaving people in poverty. That seems more irrational to me.
Michael, you should be the one in charge of the economy.
The result of this conversation is that we're in charge of the economy.
This would be a nice day.
When you were talking about things that are super profitable that don't necessarily contribute to society, I was thinking about AI. This feels like with the advent of AI, this profit-seeking capitalist model has been supercharged and accelerated very quickly. What do you think about AI and the way it's being used today?
So look, I think that AI is like any technology. And this is crucial, capitalism does not give us technologies. Engineers, scientists, innovators, people, workers create new technologies. What capital does is it controls them and then determines how they're used. And of course, the objective for capital when it comes to any technology is to leverage it for more profitability. What AI knows is entirely what our knowledge has produced, right? It reads our books, it reads our posts, it reads all the things that we write and produce. And that's where its knowledge comes from. The power of AI is completely a collective power, and yet we have no control over it. And so the few firms that control the AI industry are going to be leveraging it for the profits of the elites, totally regardless of whether it's going to be damaging for us or beneficial to society or anything like that. And so I think that like the best way to think about the possibilities of AI is why couldn't we have AI that is under democratic control, which we can use to improve society and also ensure that we all benefit from this tool that actually has been trained on our knowledge in the first place, right? This is a much more reasonable approach to any kind of technology.
Right. I think that's a good note for anyone who sees what's happening with AI and just wants to obliterate it and say, don't use it, hold the line, just don't engage. I completely understand that reaction because of the way it's being used. But I think that we need to build a vision for how it could be used in the right ways and also create the economic incentives for it to be used in the right ways. Right now, it's being used to shove a lot of products into our digital digital environment that feel invasive and unwanted to a lot of people. And the fact that it's using a ton of energy and a ton of water is not helpful. In fact, in the US, a lot of our electricity bills are going up because of the data centers that are using more and more electricity.
Think about it. In the middle of a climate crisis, this is a good example of irrationality, you know? And what's funny to me is that I remember when I was in London that I was invited to an AI firm. This is years back when it was still like a very nascent technology. And they promised me, they're like, look, you're going to love what AI can do because AI is going to dramatically reduce energy use because it's going to find new ways of being energy efficient, et cetera, et cetera. And I was thinking to myself, and I think I even said it to the guy, I guarantee you that's not going to happen because like with all capitalist technologies, like the idea is going to eventually be to maximize growth and output. And so whatever efficiency gains you do make are going to be wiped out by the increase in the total use of this technology.
Right.
And that's exactly what's happening. Just massive increased energy demands due to AI, and it's going to have to be regulated.
And when you said that to this AI entrepreneur, he was probably a bit heartbroken because a lot of people in that space are optimistic. They do want to use the tech for good. But the thing that I think a lot of them aren't reckoning with is that the way that economic incentives in a capitalist economy are set up means that their vision isn't going to be what happens. It's going to be used
Right.
to just effectively extract as much profit as possible. The economy will find a way to use it in the most extractive way possible because that's the way our system is set up.
That's right. Look, I think that AI, again, like any technology, can actually be really beneficial for society. It actually could be used to increase efficiency, but this would have to be in some kind of post-growth or eco-socialist scenario where you're liberated from the growth imperatives that capital is normally subject to. And so in a scenario like that, then technologies can be extremely effective at increasing efficiency and driving down total energy and material use. So there's nothing about technology that's necessarily bad. It's simply the particular kinds of imperatives that technology is subject to in a capitalist economy.
So what would a post-capitalist political transition look like? Is that about electing democratic socialists into office? Is that a political revolution where the workers are seizing the means of production? What do you think is actually possible?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is this. Let's start with the climate movement. I think that the existing tactics of the climate movement are not going to get us anywhere in the future. I think they've been, which is basically protest, right? Like mass mobilization for protest. I think that they've been extremely effective at bringing people onto the streets and building a new kind of public discourse and public will. But the reality is, I think that it's clear now to everyone that they lack the political power to actually achieve the kind of transformation that is necessary, right? And so the reality is simply that protest is not enough. What's going to be required, I think fairly clearly, is building some kind of political machine, some kind of party mechanism. And I don't mean like a liberal bourgeois style party. I mean a party in the more traditional sense of a mass-based organization with roots in working class communities that can win an election and achieve power and implement the necessary changes. And this is going to be, right, this is going to be a real political struggle because obviously there are certain factions of our society that benefit tremendously from the status quo of the world economy. And so it would be a process of building enough power to overcome those factions and make the necessary changes that we need. And I think that as people who want to see a progressive transformation, we have to be strategizing now, what does winning look like? Like we have to go beyond simply critique and build the kind of organizations and the kind of power that can actually win. I think that's this is an urgent objective. And for people to say that, like, you know, we don't have enough time to do this kind of political transformation in order to deal with climate change and other social crises, my argument is this is our only option. Because if we fail to do that, then we will definitely not be able to address climate change or social deprivation, et cetera. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
We can see that very clearly. And we should get on board with doing this necessary organizing work now, sooner rather than later.
I think a lot of people, when they hear that, are going to think, you know, working within the political system is just, it's not going to work. There's too, especially in the US, there's too much money in politics. But I agree with you. There's really no other way to do it. And ultimately, it actually feels super achievable because the policies and the ideas that we're talking about here are actually materially much better for the majority of people.
Exactly.
And democracy means who has more votes, right? So it's just a matter of kind of getting the word out and getting people excited and rallied around a particular movement.
So I think you're completely right in your analysis that these ideas can be popular. We know this for a fact. Like if you look at survey data, we can see that the core policies that we propose for eco-socialist transformation are extremely popular, like the public job guarantee, for example. I mean, this
universal healthcare as well.
Universal healthcare, universal public services more broadly. I mean, climate action. These things pull extremely well. The job guarantee itself, which is a totally transformative policy proposal, pulls at like 80%. I mean, there's almost no policy of any kind that pulls as well as that, and yet we're not seeing any political parties advance these ideas, and that's why nothing like this happens. But I think that this can form the basis for a very popular political movement that can actually win elections. The possible political momentum is there. I would say that the lessons we need to learn from, for example, the Bernie campaign and the Corbyn campaign in the UK, like one of the main lessons here is that narrative alone, policy alone is not enough because it makes you very vulnerable to counter-narrative backlash, right? And you could see how in both cases they got like brutally trashed by mainstream media and this in many ways sunk their campaign. For Bernie, there were other issues as well from within the Democratic Party itself. But in order to prevent this kind of thing, this vulnerability from being an issue, I think that a very strong ground game is crucial. And I don't just mean like knock on enough doors, pass around enough leaflets. No, I mean like we have to build neighborhood associations get people to build trust, understand, what's going on, build up their ideological capacity to resist, media backlash, and so that it just slides off them rather than making them afraid, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So this is the kind of this is what I mean by real mass-based movements. We've got to build that kind of ground game, and that's what we have to start doing, I think.
I just want to go back to one thing you mentioned that had around 80% popular support, this idea of a public job guarantee. I think that's a policy that not many people would be familiar with. Can you just explain what that means?
Let's talk about this. I think it's an amazing policy and really interesting to me. If you think about one of the main sources of chaos and misery in our societies is unemployment and the constant threat of unemployment, right? Like we're miserable and anxious because we know that unless we subordinate ourselves to our bosses and do the miserable kind of work they demand of us, which is mostly to facilitate elite accumulation, if we disobey in this kind of arrangement, then we're basically kicked out and somebody else.
And I'll just add, especially in the US when we don't have universal health care, it's even scarier to disobey.
Yeah, you're more or less like locked into this relationship and you don't really have an alternative. And so the threat of unemployment is very scary. People who actually live in involuntary unemployment, they face like very severe problems, right? Accessing even basic goods and services. The sense of economic insecurity is like a major fear that people have. And so it's impossible actually for us to talk about let's scale down production of SUVs and fast fashion and et cetera. Because what about the job losses? You actually can't have such a conversation because if this is going to end up exacerbating unemployment and economic insecurity, then you shouldn't be doing it, actually. The moral reality is you should not be doing it. And so you need some way of dealing with that fundamental problem that is always with us. And the public job guarantee resolves that problem. There is absolutely zero reason for unemployment at all. It's a total artificial scarcity of capitalism. It is essentially us just saying, we are going to wait around until capital determines that it's profitable enough to hire workers to do things that capital wants. But there's no reason that we could not directly hire workers through public finance to do the things that are necessary for a good society, right? And so create a structure that allows anyone who wants to train and participate in the most important collective projects of our generation, right? Building renewable energy capacity, expanding public transit, retrofitting buildings, regenerating ecosystems. There's a lot of work that needs to be done for a just and ecological transformation, and capital is not doing it, so we need to do it directly. And this is where a public job guarantee can be very transformative. So not only do you fundamentally abolish the question of unemployment, abolish the question of economic insecurity, but you also redirect labor towards what is socially necessary and meaningful work and away from kinds of work that is only beneficial to capital accumulation.
Right.
And so, and you can also use the job guarantee to set standards in the economy. Think about this. If the job guarantee means you get a job doing meaningful, socially beneficial work with living wages, right? Or wages matched also to even higher skills, and workplace democracy at, let's say, 35 hours a week, right? If you are flipping burgers for McDonald's, are you going to stick around there for very long? No, you're going to leave and go to the job guarantee where there's much better conditions and you feel more satisfied as a worker. And so that puts pressure on McDonald's and other private employers to increase their offer to workers, otherwise risk losing staff.
Right.
And I think that this increases the bargaining power of labor. It allows us to shift our productive capacities towards where we want them to be. In every way, it's powerful. And can allow us to achieve our social and ecological objectives much more quickly. It's, to me, a total no-brainer and is something that any progressive candidate should immediately seize upon. A crucial thing to know about the job guarantee is that it doesn't need to be centralized decision-making, right? You can decentralize the job guarantee, even to the level of neighborhoods. It depends on the kinds of tasks you want to achieve. But you can imagine a job guarantee at the neighborhood level where you're collectively deciding, what do we need to invest work into? Do we want to build
community garden,
a community garden, or
gym,
or a gym, or a home for elderly people,
right?
Or do we want to run a soccer team for the kids? You can actually make decisions to invest labor in doing those things.
Right.
These are like socially meaningful things for us to be doing.
And locally, they know what the community actually needs.
They know what the community needs.
So it'd be like some sort of budget allocation into local areas.
There would be a public finance budget allocation to local areas that they can expend in whatever way they see as necessary, and that would be democratically decided on.
That makes way too much sense.
It makes too much sense. I know we should stop talking about it. I mean, of course, then for other kinds of projects, like say a national rail system, obviously this would have to be decision making at a centralized level. Otherwise, you can't achieve something so big as a project like that. And so you'd have a job guarantee program that is arranged at the appropriate level of decentralization to achieve the objectives you want.
Hell yeah. You know, I compare this to what our state in the US is currently investing into. And I would say the best way to summarize it is we're cutting all of the things that are actually public services, and we're plowing money into the military, police, surveillance, AI. It's a very diabolical list of things that our government is actually willing to invest lots of money into. But suddenly there's a ton of public funding available for those things.
Think about
just
it.
not for national parks, food stamps, public housing. Could never imagine pulling a budget together for those things. But in some ways, I think that this actually highlights the need to take over the government in order to fix this type of thing, because really the state is the only agent in society with the ability to implement something like a public job guarantee, right? This is where you actually need the ability of a state to print money and finance things in order to implement this type of solution. When people think about the state, they sometimes they're like, okay, in 1984, the state's going to have so much control over everything. We don't want that type of authoritarianism. We prefer freedom. But it's really a government working for the people that allows for freedom. Is that how you see it?
Correct, yeah. I mean, to the authoritarian, there's so much to say about the state here. The first important thing to notice is that for people to think like, oh, there's some kind of antagonism between capital and the state. No. I mean, can you see? The state is totally captured by capital. And so the investments the state is making are investments that are paving the way for profitability for capital, right? I mean, the weapons industry is an amazing example of this. The state can control the weapons industry, and what they do is they just facilitate massive transfers of our surplus into the pockets of the billionaires that control the weapons industry. It's totally mad. So the state is is a neutral phenomenon. I mean, the
sort of like technology, like
exactly.
you mentioned.
The state does whatever is determined by the people that control it. And right now it is controlled overwhelmingly by capital and the stooges of capital. Let's call it the ruling class. Just a term I plucked out of the ether. And what's funny to me is that this is in fact dictatorial. We live in an autocracy already, where we don't have control over our productive capacities. The state does, and the state is controlled by capital and billionaires who get to use its apparatus for their own interests. I mean, if you think that this represents freedom, I mean, this is totally illusionary, right?
Yeah.
And so the key is we want to assert democratic control over the state apparatus, and so it can do the things that we need. And you're absolutely right. The key power comes down to money creation. And this idea that can we fund the things that we need to do, the job guarantee and renewable energy, et cetera. This is the crucial thing to understand, is that there are no financial limits on the state's ability to fund these things, because the state is a currency issuer. The state issues currency, which can mobilize labor to do things, and it can pay people to do whatever it wants, right? You want to build renewable energy capacity, we can fund that. You want to build hospitals and affordable housing, we can fund that. No limitations. The only actual real world limitation is, of course, inflation.
Yeah, preventing that from happening, preventing inflation. Right?
Exactly, yeah. And so inflation basically occurs if we're doing a bunch of new public production, if there's limitations on the real productive capacity of the economy, not enough resources and labor in factories, this is going to cause competition for these resources and drive prices up. That's inflation. And so what you have to do is you have to somehow mitigate that excess demand. And the obvious way to do that is, there's two mechanisms. One is by taxing the rich, which basically reduces the demand of rich people on our productive capacity. And the other is through degrowing unnecessary industries.
Right.
And so if we want to increase our production of affordable housing and solar panels, let's say, then to do this in a way that is non-inflationary, you also want to reduce production of SUVs and fast fashion. And therefore, you're liberating real resources that can be remobilized around what you want to do. And so this is a power that states have. And this power should not be in control of capitalists. It should be in control of the people.
This is an important point. This phrase tax the rich, it's not just about taking rich people's money because they don't deserve it. It's about freeing up demand in the economy and freeing up resources in the economy for the things that the rest of us actually want.
Correct, yeah. I think this is crucial because people have this idea that money is just almost abstract credits. And so it doesn't really matter if somebody has $1 billion or $1 trillion or whatever, right? But it actually really does matter, because the more money you have, the more command you have over labor. This is crucial. money is command over labor. And so people that have lots of money can command our labor to do the things that they want to do, which is why we have a situation where we are going around building mansions for rich people and curating their lawns and building yachts for them, et cetera, completely mad, right? And so
going to Mars. Because some rich guy wants to.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're commanding our labor to do these things. So the purpose of taxing the rich is not so that we can fund public services, right? I mean, this is crucial because the state funds public services directly by issuing currency. The purpose of taxation is to reduce the demands of the rich on our labor and productive capacities, so that we can do the things that we as people, as a democratic society, believe should be done. And of course, the other reason is because rich people completely corrupt our society and our democratic processes. It's in fact not even possible for us to have a functioning democracy when billionaires own our press and can rig elections by using campaign finance, just outright buying politicians openly, right? I mean, it's totally mad. And so you want to tax rich people to reduce their ability to corrupt our society so that we can have what we all believe is important, and that is a democracy. So there's very good reasons to tax rich people, but we don't normally talk about what those reasons really are. We're stuck in this fantasy that we have to tax rich people in order to pay for public services, when that's not in fact what the key objective is.
I would love to paint the picture of what this better future could look like, what this better society could look like. You've mentioned a few of the things, right? No unemployment, cleaner air and water, more biodiversity. What else comes to mind?
Yeah, I think that it's interesting. Like, what does it feel to live like in this kind of society?
Does it feel like living in Barcelona?
In some ways, I suppose. The key is basically like your sense of economic insecurity would be abolished. You would always know that that you can get a job doing important, socially necessary work, under good conditions where you're not going to be exploited by an abusive boss. You're going to earn living wages. This, I think, is like, for most people, is an absolutely transformative possibility.
Absolutely.
And so that's one. I think that, that knowing you have the security of universal public services is another thing. And we know that, by the way, there's so much data on this from studying European societies compared to the US. When people have access to universal services, we know they're happier, they're less anxious, they live better lives, they worry less about the future, they can focus more on relationships and things that are meaningful to them, et cetera. That's another crucial element to this kind of better society. And then, of course, people say, well, what are the main benefits of an eco-socialist transformation? I would say having a habitable planet.
Yeah.
I mean, that's quite nice.
Seems important.
I mean, this is actually quite huge if you think about it. Our existing economy cannot deliver that. It is fundamentally incapable of delivering the most basic thing, which is to ensure that we have a habitable planet, right? And a democratic eco-socialist transformation can deliver that, and quickly. And I think that is, what is not to love about that?
And if it means a little less work and a little more free time and a little more time to enjoy hobbies and art and the things that actually make life worth living, seems like a no-brainer. People often frame it as if taking control away from these market forces is going to lead to some type of life where we have less choice. But actually, I think if we take power away from the forces that are controlling society now, it's going to mean more agency for all of us,
Absolutely.
more freedom for all of us, and less of a requirement to plug into a system that violates our basic rights consistently.
Absolutely.
Okay.
This question of choice, I think, is really interesting because I think right now, actually, we have very limited choices. Like, our choices are so limited that we cannot choose public transit over cars. We cannot choose clean energy over fossil fuels. We cannot choose, a habitable planet. We can't choose decent employment, things like this. I mean, what kind of choice is this? This actually sounds miserable.
You call this freedom?
You call this freedom? And so I guess the thing that, to be fair to people who worry, the thing they're worried about is, are we going to have, less choice in the market to buy certain kinds of things? Let's take our laptops and our phones and things like that, right? These things are designed to break down after a very short period of time. So we're constantly having to buy new ones. The same is true for fast fashion, right? Like, instantaneously, you're going to feel that next year that shirt's out of style and you got to get a new one. That shirt will never go out of style.
Come on, man. I think I look pretty good.
It does look good, I must say. There's roses, which is good for
I think so.
a discussion about socialism.
Yeah.
So look, we actually don't have any choice or agency over the quality of the products that get produced. And a more rational economy, we could have longer lasting products that are upgradable, that allow us to actually exercise more choice in the market to get, products that we think are actually better, that are not being produced right now because capital does not find them profitable to produce.
Right.
The whole thing with planned obsolescence is capital does that because it's profitable, even though it's actually against our interests. And we could have better products, longer lasting products, better technology that serves people under conditions where we have more democratic control over production. So in many ways, I would say our choices are enhanced under such a scenario rather than reduced.
Right. And I think part of the reason that people have this association between capitalist market economies and freedom is that in this structure, people who do succeed in the capitalist system do buy themselves a lot of freedom. So people who are making millions of dollars a year do actually have quite a bit of freedom. They can go wherever they want. They can have multiple homes. They can, join a country club, whatever they do. But the truth is that for the majority of people, those freedoms are not actually accessible. But we're all fixated on the people who have those things and thinking that could be me, right? So culturally, it's this alluring image of freedom that's always a little bit beyond your reach. And by the way, it's getting harder and harder to reach as the economic conditions worsen, economic mobility goes down. I just want to shine a light on the fact that the odds of freedom are much higher in a world where basic public services are guaranteed. And it's really the odds of freedom that we're trying to maximize here.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. There's so much to unpack about this. I mean, first of all, there's really interesting research by Professor Ha-Joon Chang, a Cambridge economist, who points out, look, I mean, one of the arguments that capitalists make about universal services and a job guarantee, for example, is, this is going to reduce innovation, in the economy. But what he shows is this is actually totally the opposite. Like when people are afraid, when they face economic insecurity, they make safe choices. They don't innovate because they're worried, right? When you have security, when you know that necessary goods and services are being produced and are available for you, then you're at liberty to innovate, to try something new, to be creative, And so actually people are actually more innovative and risk-taking in some interesting ways when they're not, perpetually worried about ending up in poverty. The second thing is, this idea that what's great about the American dream is that we can all be millionaires, This is so interesting to me because it's actually like, if we were all millionaires, none of us would be millionaires. Because what is the quality of being a millionaire? Is your ability to command labor, right? It's like, you talked about the country club and the yachts, et cetera. Like, someone's got to be building your yacht. Someone's got to be curating your country club.
Mowing the lawn,
bringing you your cocktails, right? If people are millionaires, if everyone's a millionaire, will they be doing that labor? No. Therefore, you will not have the benefits of being a millionaire. The success achieved by some is literally only success because there are other people that are subordinated to work for them, doing everything that they want, right? It can only ever be a few, which is why there's no society where everybody becomes elite. It just doesn't happen. It's always a small fraction of society. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is that a society we're willing to live in, where most people are subordinated to service the whims of elites, because that's the reality of having an elite class.
Right.
We're effectively, when you have an elite class, you're devoting your society's labor and energy and materials to servicing their desires, however perverted that might be. This is an irrational thing to be doing.
And it's objectively not good for the majority of people. So we've been talking about the cultural barriers to making this transition and also the elite standing in the way, which are pretty clear challenges to pulling this off. By this, I mean this transition. But I think another challenge is just the military-industrial complex and the geopolitical struggle between these imperialist nation states that benefit so much from economic growth. Because ultimately, all of that growth fuels it includes a lot of industries like the weapons manufacturers. Ultimately, like the militaries are huge economic machines, and they also result in a ton of power for the political leaders of the countries that are militarized. I'm thinking about the US and the Trump administration. A lot of their ability to influence the world stage, and you could say the same about the administration of China and other global superpowers, is that they have these powerful militaries that are able to put the might behind their will. sometimes it holds me up thinking about a eco-socialist transition to know that if you're an independent state actor, especially an imperialist one, it's not really in your best interest to start serving your people better, because ultimately your power doesn't come from your ability to make people happy in your country. It comes from your ability to drop bombs and flex your military might. Do you see that as an obstacle? Do you see a way around that? And to what extent do you feel optimistic that these imperialist states are going to be able to pull it off? Or is it more about actually the people taking control of the state within those countries?
Yeah, I mean, this is really in some ways the heart of it, right? I think an important thing to recognize here is that the military-industrial complex and the wars that we constantly see, and these are wars waged overwhelmingly by the core economies, right? By the wealthy economies. Why is that? Like, why is it these apparently liberal democracies of the West are such incredibly violent warmongers? I mean, routinely conducting coups and assassinations in global South countries, violating the sovereignty of other countries, completely like bombing them to smithereens. We saw this in my lifetime alone, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, what they clearly want to do to Iran, the warmongering against China. Like, what is going on here? And these are the so-called liberal democracies. It's actually crazy that we have this in our mind, that these are somehow these are the civilized countries, So the reason this occurs, of course, is precisely because of capitalism. And this has been true for the past 500 years of capitalist history. Capitalism requires an imperial arrangement as a fundamental condition for its existence. The key element of capital accumulation is that you need cheap labor and cheap nature. Now, you can do that domestically in your own economy only to a certain extent, cheapening your working classes and exploiting your ecological base until you face contradictions, like you're going to have a revolution or your ecological base will become degraded and you won't be able to produce anymore. And so capital has to resolve this problem by finding an outside, an external frontier from where to appropriate cheap nature and cheap labor in abundance. And that is where colonialism came in. And so the colonies were organized around being suppliers of cheap nature and cheap labor. These are terms used by Jason Moore, the political ecologist Jason Moore.
And when you say cheap nature, you mean like raw materials?
Yeah, basically raw materials. And by cheap, I mean like you can extract them with impunity. Like you don't worry about regulations. You don't worry about dispossessing the people who depend on them for their lives. You don't worry about the wages that must be paid to them. In lots of cases, this was done like through outright enslavement of people, dispossession of people, etc. That's what makes nature cheap, right? And so there was a massive appropriation of nature and labor from the global South. And we live now in a apparently post-colonial era, but in reality, the same mechanisms are at play. And we can see this empirically, where growth in the core capitalist economies, Western Europe, the USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Israel, we know empirically that growth and consumption in these countries depends on a massive appropriation of labor and nature from the global South. And we've shown this in several papers now using models of the world economy. And it's actually staggering. And so in order to maintain that flow of wealth from south to north, they have to prevent the global South from achieving sovereign developments, right? And this is the reason for the wars that continually are imposed on the global South. Any country that starts to achieve sovereign developments, like organizing their own resources and production around the national development needs of their own population, gets attacked. And the reason is because when global South countries do that, it's good for the global South, for the workers and the people of the South, but it's inflationary for capital in the core because it increases the input price and makes profit maximization more difficult to achieve. And so what they want to do is they want to bomb those countries, destroy their development infrastructure, and make them cheap once again. This is crucial for the continuation of capital accumulation and is the main cause of imperialist wars. And so if we want to see an end to imperialist wars, we have to overcome capitalism.
So you're saying that when the U.S. goes in and bombs a global South country, it's not to defend women's rights?
It is definitely not to defend women's rights.
Because that's what I hear on the news and back home.
Which is so funny because if you think about like the U.S. and the idea that it's for democracy or something like that.
Yeah.
Like the U.S. props up dictatorships around the world. They regularly depose democratically elected leaders and replace them with dictatorships, including ones that are very regressive and oppress women. I mean, if you think about like, just look at Saudi Arabia. I mean, a core Western ally, has a terrible record on women's rights, obviously, and yet you never hear a peep about that,
Right.
So
We're not
you're
going to
about,
liberate the women of Saudi Arabia
exactly.
anytime soon.
There's nobody in the U.S. power class that wants to do that.
Because they serve our economic interests. So ultimately, it does come down to, there is this like really strong link between the economic model and imperialism.
Absolutely.
And so would you say it kind of comes down to the people in all of the countries, right? It's not up to the global north to solve all of these problems. But ultimately, if the root of the problem is imperialism, then it is actually essential that the governments of the imperialist countries are taken over by the people and decisions start to get made in a more humane way that delivers not just justice and better lives for people in those countries, but ultimately that'll have a spillover effect into the global south.
Totally. This is crucial, right? If you're a person that does not want to see bombing and genocide and literal slave labor, which is right now occurring in the Congo, which is crucial to the supply chains that make our technologies possible, right? I mean, the kind of exploitation that we're talking about that occurs in the global south to feed capitalist supply chains in the global north is unspeakable. And if this is concerning to anybody, then the solution is clearly a post-capitalist transformation. But here's the important point, is that the real agent of world historical transformation here is also going to be global south struggles for independence, for sovereignty. The states in the global south that want to break free from the imperialist arrangements and reclaim control over their own productive capacities and organize them around human needs and well-being and national development, like we're seeing in the Sahel countries, for example, right now, or like China, like the revolution in China that occurred in the 1950s, in the 1940s. By the way, the USA has never forgiven them for having that revolution and kicking the imperialists out. Over and over again, the anti-colonial movement has achieved these objectives, and the immediate response from the West is to topple their governments and intervene militarily or through rigging elections, et cetera, et cetera. The U.S. has conducted dozens of regime change operations in the global south in this way. But what's crucial here is that this shows you where the sensitive point is in the capitalist world economy. When the global south pursues liberation struggle, this destabilizes capitalism, and the global north countries face a choice. Either they can accept decolonization and shift to a post-capitalist economy, right? Or they can choose to maintain capital accumulation by reimposing the imperial arrangement in some violent kind of way. And so, and this shows you that's the crucial role that can be played by people in the global north, is that when this crisis comes, which it came in the 1970s and is going to come again, is maybe we're even in that moment right now, where capital accumulation has difficulty because of liberation struggles in the global south and wants to react with war, there's an alternative. We have to make that alternative available, and that alternative is to shift to a post-capitalist economy that does not require an imperial arrangement. This is crucial. An economy, a functioning economy, does not require imperialism. A capitalist economy does. And so we can shift to a post-capitalist economy that does not require that kind of violence. But we have to have the organizations, the ideas, the political infrastructure in place to make that a reality.
Right. It makes me think about the situation in Palestine now and the recent escalation of the situation into Iran. Do you see the occupation of Palestine as a result of capitalist imperialism?
I think there's an absolutely crucial connection there. Yeah. I think we have to understand that, like why does the U.S. support this genocidal regime, Israel, right? It's strange because it's deeply unpopular in the U.S. People want to see the genocide stop. They recognize that Israel is being extremely destructive, committing war crimes, violating international law, etc. Why would the U.S. continue to support this system to the point of debasing their own apparent values so publicly, right? And the reason is because the U.S. sees Israel as crucial to the interests of the capitalist class. Now, let me explain exactly what's going on here. The U.S. started supporting Israel in the 1960s, right? Now, why was that? Is because across the Middle East and North Africa, there was a movement called Pan-Arabism and also Pan-Africanism and Arab socialism and African socialism, which were inspiring the masses in these regions. And the U.S. knew, if you're looking at the Middle East and North Africa, which they consider to be the linchpin of the world, right? Think about it. Like, this is at the center point of Asia, Africa, and Europe. An area like this going independent and having control over their own resources is deeply threatening to the possibility of
existential threat.
Existential threat, totally. And so they knew they needed some way of destabilizing these movements, and they used Israel to do that. So Israel became kind of the attack dog of the United States. They armed it to the teeth. They directly used Israel to destabilize the more radical movements in the Middle East, the socialist movements in the Middle East, other progressive forces. They used Israel to bomb countries, assassinate leaders, destroy progressive political associations, et cetera, et cetera. Israel became extremely useful for them in this regard. And that's why it's effectively a U.S. military base in the region. It's like it's their bridgehead to maintaining control and ensuring the prevention of development in that region. I'm talking about independent development, right?
Right.
Not like Saudi Arabia's development, which is totally like aligned with U.S. interests.
Funded in many ways by the
It's
US.
effectively a client state of the United States. Yeah. I'm talking about what they want to avoid is independent development. And the reason they routinely want to bomb countries in the Middle East and North Africa is to achieve that. That's why they got rid of Libya, Iraq, Syria, et cetera, et cetera. So, and Israel's instrumental for doing that. It's effectively a projection of U.S. power in that region.
It's not just about having a military presence in an oil-rich area, which it is about that, but it's actually fundamental to the operation of this imperialist capitalist economic model that's global and runs much deeper than just the oil trade.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, if you think about it, because these ideas are popular, right? In the 60s and 70s, national liberation ideas and socialist ideas were extremely popular across the global south. Look at Asia. I mean, extraordinary popularity of socialist struggles there. And the U.S. knew they had to be intervening to destroy that. And that's why, of course, they did the Vietnam War. It's not just about any particular resource. It's about we have to dismantle the very possibility of these popular socialist movements ever winning the hearts and minds of people, which they automatically do, right? And so they have to be violently crushed. And that's what this is effectively the bread and butter of U.S. foreign policy, to the point where it's absolutely insane. Like, Vietnamese peasants would like to control their own land and produce for their own well-being. And the U.S. is just like, you know what? We're going to have to completely destroy your country with napalm and firebombing because that is not an acceptable idea. Freedom is not an acceptable idea. This is what we're dealing with. And so it's not necessarily like the U.S. desperately needs Gaza to be obliterated, but rather they cannot stomach the possibility of a liberated Palestine because this might lead to liberation movements elsewhere in the region. And that becomes very destabilizing for the U.S., for capital accumulation. And so if we want to avoid being in a situation where it is somehow rational for our leaders to be conducting a genocide, then we have to overcome this particular economic system.
The disconnect for me is that the U.S. uses liberal values to justify these interventions, that we use values like freedom and women's rights and anti-authoritarianism to justify these sorts of actions. And you've said in your work that liberalism is actually dead. What do you mean?
Yeah, so first we should be clear about what liberalism is. It's an interesting political ideology where basically it's got two major commitments. On the one hand, it has an ostensible commitments to things like human rights, the rule of law, individual freedoms, even things like a little bit of welfare and let's say ecological protection and things like that. These are a basic package of
liberal values. Yeah. Sounds great.
Sounds great. At the same time, liberalism is committed to capitalism. And this is essential to liberal ideology, is that ultimately they are committed to the processes of ensuring that production is controlled by capital and maintaining the conditions for capital accumulation. Now, the problem here is that when these things come into conflicts, then liberal leaders will resolve the contradictions in favor of capital accumulation, even if it means throwing, things like rights and the rule of law and freedom under the bus. Okay. And this is what explains the fact that liberals have this reputation of being hypocrites. They're full of spectacular contradictions. And so you get people who are committed to things like, liberal rights and et cetera, then openly backing a genocide. Like, what is anyone supposed to make of that, right? I mean, this is a very severe contradiction that means that liberalism actually has nothing left. There's no base left for that. You can't run an ideology with principles like that. So I think it's exposed. It constantly fails. It crumbles in the face of its own contradictions. And then what happens is that, crucially, liberals are anti-socialist. And so they'll do everything possible to crush actual progressive socialist movements.
Why is that? Why are liberals anti-socialist?
Because of their ultimate most important commitment, which is to capital accumulation. They will never let that be threatened. And that's why we saw, like, when somebody as beloved as Bernie Sanders was a few years ago in the primaries, they had to band together and crush him. And the same thing happened with the Corbyn campaign in the UK. Now, this is interesting because when you're crushing socialist movements and you're ultimately also yourself crumbling and failing, then what does that do? It leaves a political vacuum open to who? The far right, right? And so liberalism gives way to fascism over and over and over. It's like clockwork. And the reason ultimately is because, let's look at fascists. Fascists, their core principle also is capital accumulation, right? But they just dispense with the liberal values. And so liberals are actually more comfortable handing power over to the far right because they're confident that at least capital is going to be protected than they are handing power to socialists who will maintain their liberal values of, rule of law and rights and things like that, but will not protect capital accumulation, right? And so the preferences of liberalism become clear. And this is why we see this constant back and forth between the far right liberals, the far right liberals. The fascists take control. They create total social chaos. Everyone's like, this is far too extreme for us. Let's go for that safe center option again. They vote for the liberals. Liberals come back into power. Rinse and repeat over and over.
So you're saying that both of those parties, the liberals and the fascists, ultimately are protecting the accumulation of capital, which means effectively liberal people will vote for a far-right candidate over a socialist candidate because they know that at least their economic interests will be protected.
I don't know about regular liberal voters, but definitely the liberal ruling class, the people that control the Democratic Party, for example, are going to make sure to squeeze out socialist options and prevent them from accessing like media platforms for debates and things like that.
Yeah.
As far as liberal voters go, I think that a lot of people who actually vote for the Democratic Party could easily be swayed to vote for a Bernie Sanders. I mean, we saw that the Democratic base swung for a Bernie in a very serious way.
Yeah.
And so it's not actually like the rank and file voters that I think is a problem here, but rather the liberal elites who actually have the power. They're the real, there's these people that are directly aligned with the interests of capitalism.
When people see these socialist or democratic socialist candidates running within a global north country like the US, a lot of times the narrative around that is that it's going to be bad for the economy if these people get elected. And ultimately what you're saying is, yes, it actually is bad for capital accumulation, and that is the point. That is what we need.
Yeah.
But I think that something people get held up on is they hear the stock market's going to go down. This is just the way I see the narrative playing out in the States. You see, again, Zoran Mamdani just won the Democratic primary, and people are saying, that Wall Street's going to move to New Jersey. The elites are going to flee. The elites are going to flee the city, right? Are socialists actually going to be bad for the stock market? And is that okay?
This is what it comes down to. How are your investments doing? So first I want to answer the initial question, which is to go back to the fascist, liberal, socialist question, right? What's interesting is that, like, clearly the fascist option cannot resolve our fundamental contradictions. They can't deal with social deprivation. They can't deal with ecological crisis. The liberals also, it turns out, when any kind of crisis hits, they also opt to throw those values under the bus in spectacular displays of hypocrisy. The only option here that actually can resolve the crises that we face is a democratic socialist option, where you're able to actually mobilize your resources to deal with deprivation and ecological breakdown. So the crisis we face can be resolved this way. But the question you ask is this going to somehow be bad for the economy? Now, I think it's crucial that you point to the stock market, because this is because the stock market is not the economy.
No, it's not.
Right? It is not the economy.
Well, if you read the Wall Street Journal, you might think it is, but it's not.
I mean, it's an element of the economy that capitalists care most about.
Mm-hmm.
But what is the economy really? Let's think about that. The economy is really goods and services. It is the real things that we produce. It is our labor. It is our resources. It is our factories. It is the things that we produce with these things. And so what is a good economy? Is one that is using these productive capacities to produce the things that we know that we need for our survival and our well-being, right? And this is what socialism, we know for a fact, can achieve, right? With democratic control over our productive capacities, we can do these things. And so the economy will undoubtedly 100% be better. The real economy, the economy that ordinary people depend on for their existence every day and participate in every day, is going to be better. And so what happens to like accumulated capital by big firms and so on is actually irrelevant to this question. What matters is the real economy, and we know for a fact that that can be better.
It just shows why people get in the way of these processes happening, because if they have a ton of money and they realize that their wealth is at risk, and they can throw money into funding smear campaigns of socialist candidates or buying social media websites to effectively create a far-right echo chamber. And I know that you still are fighting the good fight on Twitter, and I appreciate you for that, or X as it's called, but I can't imagine looking at that website every day. They do it. They do fund those things. They do takedowns of the left because they realize how threatening it is to their elite status. And so I think that explains the cultural backlash against socialism. It's really just an elite backlash.
100%. It is. That's 100% correct. It always baffles me too when I hear ordinary people say, "Oh, but I support capitalism." I'm just like, what are you actually talking about? Like, you don't have any capital,
Yeah.
Like, they're your literal class enemies. Why would you support them? But there's very heavy investment in this idea that capitalism equals freedom, and freedom is a core American value. This is actually crucial to point out. Like, the only people that have freedom in capital are capitalists. Like, under capitalism, there's freedom for capital to do whatever they want, and the rest of us don't have freedom. I think this is really crucial to point out. It is, in fact, under democratic socialism that we would have actual freedom. And so our class interests and our values, democracy and freedom, are better served by this kind of economic model and are actively quashed by our existing economic model. But you're right. I mean, the people that would be harmed by such a transition are the elites, the holders of capital, and they will do everything possible to smear these ideas as somehow just beyond the pale or intrinsically, I don't know, destabilizing. I mean, they'll come up with whatever demonization they want to, but and they'll use their media platforms to do that, exactly as you said. That's, I think, the challenge that we face.
I really appreciate you using your media platform to spread ideas that are actually going to help us move towards a better future and to fight those narratives. I know that sometimes it feels like a massive uphill battle, but I think you're doing incredible work to get the word out.
Likewise.
I really appreciate your academic research and the work you do on social media. So a couple questions actually from the audience. I mentioned that I would be interviewing you, and folks had some interest in asking you a couple questions, if you don't mind.
Let's take them.
All right.
Hopefully they're not too scandalous.
I don't think anything too scandalous. I was interested in this one accusation that you have stolen my look. I don't know that's not for me. That's just someone in my audience says that you stole my look. How would you respond to that?
I mean, for one, your shirt is much cooler than mine. I would say that I need to work on my colors. The glasses, I suppose, there's maybe some similarity, but
the glasses are similar.
But also, I'm older than you, and so I think if anything, you've stolen my look.
I would agree. I stole Jason's look.
As long as we're clear.
Stop with the slander. I'm the copycat. Some people also say that we both stole Antonio Gramsci's look.
This is interesting. I mean, I think that for one, Gramsci had way better hair than me. I mean, if anyone has seen a picture of Gramsci, like, his hair is magnificent.
His hair is amazing.
So I can admit that the glasses are maybe a little similar. I'm not totally confident I love my glasses. I might swap them out for something different.
Oh, okay. Let's see is it because I ruined the glasses for you?
Maybe there's too many of us with these glasses now.
Damn, I came to Barcelona, kind of looked a little bit like Jason, and he was like, I got to change my whole look. Damn. Okay. Some people call you degrowth daddy, or even degrowth Jesus.
Whoa. I rejected both of these.
You don't like that?
I mean, the daddy thing, I mean, that's got to go. I'm against patriarchy, you see, and so I'm not sure I want to be a daddy figure as such. But also, I would also say, I don't think that degrowth is like the main thing. Degrowth should be like an element of the transition we're talking about.
Right.
And so, yeah, I would want to kind of downplay that as like the main focus, I think.
Anti-capitalist imperialism daddy?
Yeah, something like something like democratic, eco-socialist, anti-imperialist transition daddy. But no, let's skip the daddy.
No daddy.
No daddy.
Speaking of Gramsci, I love talking about his work. You've talked a lot about his work. He's a, I think, important historical figure for people to know about. He spoke a lot about this notion of cultural hegemony, this idea that the ruling class instills their values into the common sense of the working class as a way of maintaining cultural leverage over society. It's not just about them having more money and more power and more access to using the military, but it's also that they affect culture to keep themselves in power. Did I summarize that well? And
I think that's a good summary of Gramsci.
Amazing.
Yeah. Impressive.
Thank you. Are there any examples of cultural hegemony today that are just like obvious to you that maybe aren't obvious to everyone?
Oh yeah, I mean, I feel like so many of the things we talked about are examples of cultural hegemony. Like, the idea that capitalism is freedom is just straight up cultural hegemony.
Big one.
It basically gets the working class to buy into and accept a system that is against their interests and the interests of the ruling class, and make it seem natural and normal and good.
Big one.
And so one of Gramsci's key political points is that you have to fight the struggle in the terrain of ideology, in the terrain of culture and common sense, which is exactly what you're doing with a media platform like this, trying to change common sense and build.
That is exactly what I'm trying to do.
You're basically the modern day Gramsci.
I wouldn't go that far. But I think he would support using media to push back against these cultural narratives.
He definitely would. Yeah, that would be crucial to his strategy. But I think the other thing to know about Gramsci is that for him, the struggle is not only about cultural hegemony and ideology, but also about, actual organizing. I think people forget that Gramsci was the founder of a literal communist party in Italy. He was a Marxist-Leninist and adopted Marxist-Leninist organizing tactics. And the Communist Party in Italy became very successful. By the way, became actually one of the biggest communist parties in Europe and was hugely popular in Italy. And the U.S. Intervenes covertly to try to destroy.
We did it again.
Can you believe it? In Italy, by the way, right? Within the so-called West.
As an Italian American, that
very
creates
sad.
A bit of an identity crisis.
Totally.
Which side am I on?
I feel bad for you.
Gramsci's one historical figure who you've spoken a lot about. Something I love that you do with your social media platforms is highlight other historical figures from the kind of anti-imperialist historical movement of the last couple of centuries. If there were 2 or 3 other historical figures that you would want listeners of this podcast to go look into and learn more about, who would they be?
So I'm going to go with, there's so many.
Way more than 2 or 3, of course.
I try to keep them in our minds as much as possible because they're so inspiring and they can show us the way. I'll just name the first person I would say is Thomas Sankara. He was the revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso in the 1980s. An extraordinary story. One of the things he realized is that the debt was being used as an instrument of imperial control in the global south. And so he called for collective debt cancellation in the global south, especially in Africa, as a liberatory move. And this
I can
idea
imagine some people who would be unhappy with that.
There were people who were unhappy. And in fact, it's interesting because he actually raised this issue in the African Union when he was giving a speech to his fellow heads of state. And he was like, look, if Burkina Faso, escapes the debt on its own, then I won't be here next year to speak to you. He knew that his life was on the line. But he said, if we do it together, there's no way they can kill us all. 3 months later, Thomas Sankara was assassinated in a French-backed coup and replaced with a brutal dictator who governed the country for several decades after as a stooge of the West. This is, I think, an amazing example of exactly the kinds of things we've been talking about. But one of the things that Sankara said is he said, we are the heirs of the world's revolutions. We are the heirs of the world's revolutions. I love this saying because it reminds us that every good thing that we do have, like what few democratic rights we do have, what few equalities we do have, etc., were won through struggle, through class struggle, through anti-colonial struggle, through feminist struggle, etc. And we benefit from our ancestors' struggles. And this should inspire us to take similar action in our world today. For a second person, just to be timely, I think, would be Mohammad Mossadegh. He was the first independent prime minister of Iran. And he was a progressive figure, beloved by his people, very popular in Iran. And he was making very modest moves to improve the conditions of the working class and to regain national control over Iran's oil reserves. And this pissed off the US and the UK, who then collaborated in deposing him in a coup and replacing him with, again, a dictator, the Shah of Iran, who then governed the country as a brutal enforcer of dictatorial principles for the next several decades. So again, an example. And if anyone wants to know why Iran does not trust the United States, that is the reason. That is the reason. It was the original sin of the of the relationship between Iran and the West, and has never been properly repaired for or acknowledged. And so, if you want to understand why Iran wants sovereignty, wants to be able to protect itself, wants independence, it's in that history.
And we haven't stopped meddling with Iran since. We're still doing it now.
With Iran since, yeah. It's wild, actually. There's no reason that Iran could not have had a progressive left government. In fact, every sign pointed in that direction, and that alternative was crushed. And so the only forces that were left to try to attain some kind of sovereignty was the Iranian Revolution that happened in 1979, which was organized around a different kind of line, but still wanted sovereignty. So they didn't have the socialist values or the progressive left values that we might want to see, but they were about at least achieving independence and sovereignty for Iran. And I think that's, again, history could have been very different, but we're dealing with the cards that's the material realities that have been created for us.
We are the heirs of past revolutions.
It's true.
Did I get that right?
The heirs of the world's revolutions.
We are the heirs of the world's revolutions.
Yeah.
Nice. So I'd encourage anyone watching this conversation to check you out. Where can they find your work, and what can they do to follow up on learning more about what you're teaching, both academically and otherwise?
So my personal website, which is jasonhickel.org, I keep all of my research freely available there. And there's also a website we just launched called globalinequality.org.
Oh, I saw that.
Which is, it's really exciting. So this is a collective project, a labor of love by lots of different people to make data on capitalism and imperialism and ecology available in a really accessible, interactive way for users. So check it out. It's pretty exciting.
What's the website?
It's called globalinequality.org.
Globalinequality.org.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today. Really appreciate it. It's been a great discussion. I hope people got something out of it, and we'll definitely come back to Barcelona to hang out with you again soon and remind myself what a functioning city looks like.
Thanks very much, Michael. It was really good to chat with you.
To check out the website that Jason just mentioned at the end there, head to the episode description where I've dropped a direct link. You'll also find links to his social media profiles and his personal website. As always, I appreciate your time, and I hope you got something out of this conversation. Friendly reminder that the most helpful way to support is to subscribe and to share this episode with a friend who you think would like it. We just covered some really heavy topics, so I encourage you to go for a walk, touch some grass, and stay tuned for more ideas for a better future and how you can be a part of it. See you next time. Ciao.